It's Rog, and you're listening to European Nights. Yes, the show that transports you to the front row seats of the raucous Champions League, the feisty Europa League, your connoisseur's choice Conference League. Get rowdy, it's round of 16 time, baby. And that was the official audio as UEFA reached its grubby little hands into their giant glass bowls and paired up opponents from tiny little footballs that unscrew. That is a footballing tradition, and here to reach his grubby paws into the giant bowl of narrative that has ensued is my mate, the New York Times chief soccer correspondent. It's Mr. Rory Smith.
Hello, how you doing?
Better than you, Roy. It's a very, very windy Yorkshire as we pod, right?
We are being battered by yet another Arctic storm, apparently. I've lost track.
Which is coming my way as we fly off to Wrexham. Please God, as you listen to this. Dear European Nighters. But Roy, I've got to ask, this has been on my mind since I witnessed the draw, because I do love to tune in live for UEFA televisual extravaganzas. There's been a lot of talk about match fixing, that they, heat some of the balls and freeze others, so some are hot and some are cold to the touch. It's actually John Terry, for once not in full kit wanker mode, who did the draw, sadly wearing a suit and tie, not the hoodie blazer that Gianni Infantino's trying to make the uniform of elaborate televised draws. John Terry plucking the balls out of the bowl to match up round of 16 foes this year. Tell me truthfully, Rory, because you know everything. Do they warm the balls so he knows which ones to grab? Slate seems far too perfect with a quarter-final round for the ages with the heavyweights all getting through. What's the verdict? Warm balls or no warm balls?
I mean, it's kind of, is it warm balls or is it colossal economic inequality throughout European football? And I think that that warm balls is an easier theory to understand and also explain. So let's go with warm balls. My only quibble would be, I would have thought you could warm and freeze a maximum of one ball each. If you were really looking at fixing it effectively, you'd want to warm one ball and chill another. Because if you've got 6 warm balls, how do you know which one you're pulling out?
I just don't know sometimes where the warm ball ends and the economic inequality begins. I can't remember who said that famous quote, but I think you've just extended its truth. Let's dive on into whatever way John Terry worked his evil magic. The first leg of the round of 16 takes place this week and next, and the second legs follow in March. So today, Tuesday, when this podcast hits your ear balls, the full slate is Copenhagen attempting to resist capitulation to reigning treble champs Manchester City. RB Leipzig attempting to resist capitulation to Real Madrid. Casual winners the year before that. And tomorrow, Real Sociedad's homegrown flock go up against the dizzying array of Paris Saint-Germain's talents. Also a Lazio Bayern Munich tie that we'll discuss in depth in a moment. And European Night superfans, all dozen of you, you'll remember we covered Xabi Alonso's success at Bayer Leverkusen last year, but really the transformation the club's gone through has only grown more remarkable since. And let me remind you, dear listeners, a mere 60 months ago, this team was in a real shambles, sitting, I think, one place off the bottom of the Bundesliga table. But after Xabi Alonso took over, everything has changed. They finished 6th in the league last year. They qualified for the Europa League. Now they've won all 6 of their European group stage games. And just this past Saturday, dismantled none other than mighty Bayern Munich 3-0. The Bayern Munich of Harry Kane and Eric Dyer. The goals coming from a player on loan from Bayern, Joseph Stanisic. A free signing, Alex Grimaldo, who is quite remarkable, and another bargain bin find, Jeremy Frimpong, who cost a reported $12 million from Celtic in January 2021. So this team, known as the Werkself, the Company 11, because of the club's roots as the team, founded back in 1904 by employees of the German pharmaceutical company Bayer AG, now sit 5 points clear at the top of the table, moving one step closer to becoming the first team to knock Bayern off their Bundesliga perch since Borussia Dortmund won the league in 2012. A Dortmund squad managed by, yes, you've guessed it, Jurgen Klopp. I see a theme, and we'll return to Klopp later because he too looms large in this story. But Rory, you've spent time with Xabi Alonso. How did this man so bloody quickly, so wildly outperform expectations in his very first top-flight managerial job? Leverkusen, can't be stated enough, are currently, again, I'll say this, unbloody defeated all season. It's February. How is Xabi doing this?
Well, yeah, and it's been, I think, the third best start in Bundesliga history. So that includes Pep Guardiola's Bayern teams. It includes the Jupp Heynckes Bayern team that won the treble. It includes all of those Klopp Dortmund teams. This is, by any measure, an incredible start. And it's not even. It feels a bit weird calling it the start of a season. But it's February. It's more than halfway into the season. That what Leverkusen are doing or have done already is remarkable. Wherever it ends up from here. I think there's, in terms of how it's come about, there's the story we all want to believe, and there's the story that's actually true. So the story we all want to believe is that Xabi Alonso, this incredibly cerebral, sophisticated, intelligent player, spent his career working under some of the great kind of ideologues and inspirations of modern management. So obviously his coach at Liverpool was Rafa Benitez. His coach at Real Madrid his first coach at Real Madrid was Jose Mourinho. His coach at Bayern Munich was Pep Guardiola. He worked with Carlo Ancelotti. He's picked up a little bit of each from each, a little bit of each of them over the course of the years. He's taken, the visionary style of Guardiola and how he wants teams to play in the half spaces, but equally he's borrowed Benitez's approach to pressuring the ball out of possession, and he's kind of turned himself into a modern super coach, and that appeals to us. That's an enthralling, compelling narrative about how coaching greatness is passed on through the generations, that he's learnt at the feet of the masters, and now he's ready to paint his own fresco. I think, having spoken to Xabi, I saw him in November when he was very reluctant to confess to the idea that Bayer Leverkusen might win the Bundesliga. I think he'd actually tell you something a lot more simple, that he does clearly have a knack for management, having partly because he's worked under all of those great coaching figures of the last 20 years, but also because his dad was a manager. He understands, I think, a lot of the human side of management fairly intuitively. And he basically spent his first year at Leverkusen getting to know his players, trying to work out what they were good at, what their strengths were, what their weaknesses were, what he needed to emphasize, what he needed to diminish. And the team that he's putting on the pitch is basically his version of that. He's found ways to get the best out of players who, in certain lights maybe look like they were coming towards the end of their careers. Granit Xhaka has been outstanding in midfield for Leverkusen this season, which might surprise some Arsenal fans, not all, but some. Grimaldo was picked up cheaply. He'd had injury problems. He'd always been a slightly inconsistent player, undeniably talented. Alonso's getting a tune out of him as a very trendy inverted fullback. He has recruited well, or Leverkusen have recruited well. They've filled gaps in their squad, and Alonso is very good at putting things together in a way that works. And there's no question he's doing tactically sophisticated stuff. He's got quite an intelligent system. He's accentuating certain elements. Against Bayern, they were brilliant off the ball, rather than, it wasn't a kind of tiki-taka Guardiola style performance. It was much more Mourinho-esque, actually, in the way that it forced the opposition to be something they didn't want to be. But all of it, in his eyes, comes down to building that human relationship with his players, to understanding what makes them tick, how to get the best out of them. More than Guardiola, he feels a little bit like a Carlo Ancelotti to me.
And I would, if I could, raise one eyebrow archly by that stunning piece of news. Oh, my old dad, Mr. Carlo. But there's also one cheat code to Xabi's success that we probably do have to broach. The man is Basque. That fertile managerial crescent nested into northeastern Spain had sprouted some of football's brightest coaching minds, not named Mr. Sean Dyche, talking about Aston Villa's Unai Emery, Arsenal's Mikel Arteta, Bournemouth's Andoni Iraola, to name a few. We talked about this in depth on this very podcast, November 28th, 2023. But after spending 3 years as a player with Bayern Munich and now 2 more in Leverkusen, it's actually Germany that's become Xabi's adopted homeland. Alonso told The Guardian earlier this year, "I'm Basque, total Basque, but with a big German influence." Now, I'm sure the Germans have a word for that particular kind of hybrid. But outside of football, despite his proud Basque heritage, Xabi hasn't been afraid to be a moral voice in German politics and German culture, speaking up valiantly earlier this year on the importance of protecting German democratic values, following the rise of right-wing extremist rallies erupting across the country. And in your own recent article on Alonso in that little local paper called the New York Times, Rory, you described his style of play as, quote, a fusion of Spanish control and German intensity. How exactly has Germany influenced Xabi, both as a manager and a human being? And how has this Basque German blend, honestly, it sounds like an incredible wine, manifested itself in his Leverkusen squad during this magical run?
There's a little bit of kind of COD psychology about it, I suppose, but I think that Basques are a great sort of trading people. They've always been seafaring. They've always looked outward. They've always wanted to bring things in. There's a great book called The Basque History of the World by a historian called Mark Kalansky that I would recommend to anybody who wants to learn about either Basque history or the next tranche of great football managers. That Xabi Alonso, I don't think he's mentioned by name in that, but he probably should be. I think that Xabi has always been very international in the way that he's approached things. He still laughs a little bit about his introduction to English football, which came in a Liverpool game against Bolton that I think they lost 3-0. And you can imagine that coming from a very sophisticated Real Sociedad side in San Sebastian, that encountering Sam Allardyce's Bolton Wanderers was a bit of a culture shock. But I think he's taken something from all of the countries where he's played, England and Germany. He has borrowed, if that's the right word, the kind of intensity of German pressing. It wasn't much in evidence against Bayern Munich. They played that slightly differently, but he's certainly kind of brought that into his approach. But there is an element of the Spanish teams that he played in as well in terms of the way they use the ball in possession. But then you have to remember that Alonso in that Spanish team wasn't one of the Barcelona contingent. He wasn't Xavi. He wasn't Iniesta. He hadn't been brought up in that possession retention philosophy that La Masia produces. Alonso was always a little bit more direct as a player. You know, his great secret weapon as a midfielder was his ability to spread the play. I asked him actually whether he was still the best passer of the ball at Leverkusen. Does you watch him in training and he can't resist rolling a ball under his feet. He'll be directing an exercise and there's always a ball nearby and he just, as we all do, just sort of drags it under his control, rolls it under his studs a couple of times, does a couple of keepy-uppies, maybe spins it 45 yards onto a penny on the other side of the field, just to show that he can. And I said to him, you know, are you still the best passer of the ball at the club? And he looked genuinely quite embarrassed, which I think in whatever language you speak, whether it's Basque or German or English, is the international sign for yes, but I don't want to say that. So I think he has taken a little bit of everything from all of his experiences and blended it into the type of football that he wants to play. But what's really important to stress is that I don't think that is a fixed thing. I don't think he is Guardiola, say, in the sense that he has an idea of what football should look like and he has to have his idea brought forward onto the pitch. I think he has principles he won't bow from, but he's a little bit more pragmatic. I suspect that his view is based on the players that he's got, the strengths that they have, and how to get the best out of them. That is, I think, how he's come up with the formula that's made Leverkusen so successful this season.
Oh, principles. Was it Groucho Marx that said, "These are my principles. If you don't like them, I have some others"? Feels like an eon ago, the day that Hugmeister-in-Chief and Lord of Football Chaos, Jurgen Klopp, shocked the world with his Teary-eyed announcement that he was, quote, running out of energy and would be leaving Liverpool at the end of this season. And even I, Rory, an Everton fan, and you know this, Rory, also a terrible, terrible human being, even I must admit it was an emotional, monumental loss for global football. But also one that leaves.
You sound devastated.
I am. I really am. Honestly, he's been so great for the city, Jurgen. He really, really has. In Liverpool, they call him like the city's dad, which is just such a lovely, wonderful thing. But, I mean, it does leave, it has to be said, a Teutonic Care Bear-sized hole at the managerial position of one of Europe's most storied clubs that you may or may not support personally. And it took all of about 32 seconds for the entire footballing world to turn their eyes towards Xabi Alonso as the presumptive favourite to fill Klopp's Adidas Ultra Boosts on the Liverpool sideline. But while Xabi seems to have become the de facto answer, that when Liverpool are asked who is the perfect next possible manager for your club, a quieter, more complex question actually lurks. Is it the right move for Xabi Alonso? And I think when you think about it, it's important to note part of what has made Xabi's rise so unique is that it's also been guided by his personal restraint as much as his tactical genius. For his first head coaching gig, October 2022, he chose Bayer Leverkusen, a quiet Western German city of only about 160,000 people, sitting in the shadow of its much larger neighbour Cologne. Leverkusen, more famous for being the home of corporate giant Bayer Pharmaceuticals than for its football team, which, by the way, the pharmaceutical company also owns. And the team itself, also known for their failures rather than their successes. They've earned the nickname Neverkusen from their tendency to choke away big moments, which I won't whisper into reality this season. Leverkusen, not necessarily a high-pressure situation like Xavi Hernandez is experiencing at Barcelona, another to step down recently, or even Klopp in that crucible that is Liverpool Football Club. A move to Liverpool after less than 2 years of top-flight managerial experience. It's the exact type of spicy move that Alonso so keenly avoided after retiring as a player. Gent has never really faced extended adversity as a footballing manager. So I'm wondering, Rory, does a leap to Liverpool actually make sense for him?
Well, the answer that I want to give you is, yeah, absolutely get him in right now, obviously. It is more complicated than that. So as you say, he took Leverkusen as his first senior coaching gig. He had been at Real Sociedad's youth teams prior to that, and it was interesting at the time that he kept being linked to jobs, and obviously partly because of his reputation, all the stuff that he won, and the fact that he'd worked in so many, or played in 3 different countries, 3 different leagues. It felt a bit like any of those leads might hold a job for him. And he was linked certainly with Mönchengladbach before he took the Leverkusen job. Couple of ones in England, couple of ones in Spain, and he was quite happy sitting, with Real Sociedad's youth teams, learning his trade, and that is relatively rare in modern football. When he took Leverkusen, I remember thinking at the time, and I stand by it now, Rog, Leverkusen is effectively the perfect club for a manager like that to take over. They are, well, at the time, they were 17th in the Bundesliga with a squad that very clearly shouldn't have been 17th in the Bundesliga. So that's an immediate tick in the box. Just get them playing roughly to their potential and you'll have done a good job. And you'll also fly up the table, which is exactly what happened. But also the way the club is run is really smart. So they generally budget to be in the Champions League 2 out of every 3 years, which is a fairly reasonable estimation of where they stand in the pantheon of German football teams. They obviously don't think they're Bayern Munich, they're not Borussia Dortmund, they're in the group below that. They recognise there's a bit of churn in there. They understand that you'll have good years and bad years. They have a slow burn philosophy. I think they want to bring players through. They want to have some success. They don't expect to win every game. They don't. They might do after this season, but they generally don't expect to win every game. They are patient and they are long term and they are sensible in the way they project themselves. And I think
that's got no place in football.
It's very boring and it should be outlawed, if we're all completely honest. But if I was a young manager, certainly one with the playing pedigree that Xabi had, I'd have looked at Leverkusen and thought, you know what, this is exactly the right space, the right spot for me to land. There's not really another team like that anywhere in any of the major leagues, to be honest. I mean, possibly one of a kind of a mid-table Italian side would offer you some of those things, but not really. And Alonso was really, really conscious of that. He wanted to take things slowly. He said that when I spoke to him in Munich towards the end of his last season as a player, and he said that he wasn't going to rush into anything. He didn't want to make any rash decisions. He didn't want to feel as though there was anything urgent in his next phase of life. He wanted to spend time with his family, all the stuff that players normally say, and then immediately take a managerial job. But he meant them. He was happy doing the job at Sociedad. It was his hometown team. He was contributing. He was learning the ropes. He was happy to learn the ropes. Leverkusen came along and it felt like the right opportunity at the right time. And he wanted to give himself space to grow. He is ambitious. He's never been in a rush. And I think to an extent, Xabi Alonso probably knows there are three teams he has a bond with, as well as Real Sociedad, which is the team he supported as a kid. There's Liverpool, there's Bayern Munich, and there's Real Madrid, the teams he's played for. I think he will look at it, if he's capable of looking at it coolly and rationally, and I think Xabi Alonso looks at everything coolly and rationally, as well as quite sexily, if we're all completely honest. I think he'd probably assume Real Madrid will come up at some point for him because his stock there is really high. He's beloved. Real Madrid do not tend to have dynastic managers who last for ages. 4 or 5 years is the absolute utmost anyone can cope with Real Madrid. So it won't be this summer just Carlo Ancelotti signed a new contract, but it will come up at some point. Ditto Bayern Munich, who tend to change managers every 2 or 3 years, really. His time will come for both of those jobs at some point. I think he knows that. Liverpool is a little bit different because, Jurgen Klopp has been in place for 9 years. It may well be that if Liverpool don't appoint Xabi Alonso this summer, that whoever they get instead could be there for some time. That wouldn't necessarily mean that Xabi Alonso wouldn't have a complete career without managing Liverpool, but I think he will be much more aware that when the opportunity comes up, although it's probably the smallest of those three clubs, you maybe have to take it. Whether he feels the timing is right or whether he senses that he is still, maybe a season or two short of experience, I don't know, but that may well be outweighed by the fact, and this is crucial, that he might recognise he won't have another chance to do quite as well with Leverkusen as he's had this season. This may well prove to be the peak of his Leverkusen career. And if it is, then maybe it's the time to move.
Leverkusen, thanks to winning their Europa League group, actually have a pass for this round and will rejoin the action in the round of 16, which is coming to a theatre near you in March 7th, I think. But the week ahead holds the mighty Champions League. If you'll turn in your hymnals to the page marked Lazio, you'll read this. Lazio, great Lazio. What can they do? 11 breaths, everyone breathing. Great Lazio, Lazio born to dominate. Those are some lyrics to live by. That is the hymn of Lazio sung before every game. And if there's one solitary team we've yet to discuss in depth left in this year's Champions League, from an initial total of 78 teams scattered across 55 countries. Thankfully, many of them got knocked out. So let's get down to it. Lazio, the sky blue and slightly fascisty half of Rome, one of the seven sisters in Italy. La Sette Sorelle, founded in 1900. Lazio's only ever won 2 Scudetti. The plural of Scudetto, Italian league titles, bastardised by my ignorant, non-Italian speaking mouth. But the most recent title in 2000 under Sven-Goran Eriksson, the former England boss and 442 connoisseur, who's recently disclosed he's been diagnosed with cancer. Courage to you, Sven. But back in 2000, the Serie A was clearly the best league in the world. Speaking to Jurgen Klinsmann about it, he used to shout, "That's where the music was played!" The cream of the lasagna, if you will. Lazio was breaking transfer fee records right and left, funded by owner Sergio Crenotti of the food empire Sirio. And they signed Argentinian heartthrob Hernan Crespo, slick shoulder-length mane and slicker finishing for a world record $45 million, roughly the price of one Andy Carroll or a Pedro Porro nowadays. Lazio added the Argentinian Crespo, 2 countrymen Juan Sebastian Veron and Claudio Lopez. Crenotti said, quote, "We are always looking for not just the best, but the best of the best." What they were looking at was Well, the balance sheet. They racked up a $150 million tax bill on top of the mountains of debt. As Serie collapsed, the club eventually found new ownership in the form of Claudio Lotto, made his money in the far from glamorous corporate cleaning and catering businesses that were safe from bankruptcy, but they were still paying off all these old debts. Club is cobbled together on a shoestring. Yes, they've won 4 Coppa Italia since Crenotti left, but they do struggle in league play. This is only the 3rd time they've been in the Champions League for a decade and a half. One memorable fan protest called Lotito, quote, a dream thief, which is evocative. Rory, is Lazio in some ways a tale of the decline of that once dominant, suave, shrewd Italian game, now struggling to even raise the funds to keep their teams afloat?
Yeah, I think in many ways Lazio kind of symbolised the boom era of Serie A, certainly to an English audience, because obviously in the early 1990s that was where Paul Gascoigne went to play. Gazza was the great sort of hit. Heartthrob is probably pushing it. No one ever described Gazza as a heartthrob.
The great English maverick, I think.
He was kind of a hero to that generation after the World Cup in 1990, Italia 90. He'd been the star player. He was this maverick playmaker. A really exciting player to watch, but also the phrase at the time that I will always associate with Gazza was daft as a brush, which was the kind of nice way to put your opinions of Paul Gascoigne not being the sharpest tool in the shed into the public discourse. And Gazza was, he was silly, he was laddie, he was always laughing and joking. He had a friend whose name was Jimmy Five Bellies. He was this kind of great pop culture figure, and he signed for Lazio. And as a result, England suddenly decided that Lazio was not only glamorous with its light blue shirts and its Italian sunshine, but really important. And that Lazio team, that Lazio era that Gazza was kind of at the start of, was one of the most, certainly before kind of Abramovich and Chelsea and Abu Dhabi and Manchester City, was one of the most kind of lavish spenders in the transfer market that I think anybody had ever seen. Sergio Cragnotti, who was the owner, the Cheerio magnate, spent huge sums of money trying to win a Serie A title. As you say, Lazio had only won one before, inspired in the 1970s by New York Cosmos legend Giorgio Chinaglia, and enemy of Pele. And Craniotti's great dream was winning a title, and he bought basically everybody he could think of. They signed Pavel Nedved, they signed Marcelo Salas, they signed Christian Vieri, they sold Christian Vieri, they signed, as you say, Hernan Crespo, they had Claudio Lopez, Geister Mendieta. Anyone and everyone seemed to pass through Lazio at some point, and eventually it all paid off with that title under Sven-Göran Eriksson. But I think looking back, one Serie A title for the level of expenditure at the time, you were talking summer transfer spends that were getting up towards $100 million, which at the time was completely unheard of. They were spending huge sums of money, even by Italian standards. And it had a glamour to it. It looked like Serie A, as you say, was the best league in the world, but Lazio looked like the kind of the most potent, most financially powerful club in the best league in the world. They were Italian football's glamour writ large, really. And then as Cheerio collapsed in 2002, it all came crashing down, and the club for a long time struggled to pay the bills. It needed bailing out. A lot of the players left, obviously, because they couldn't afford those massive wages. And what you've seen in the 20 years since now is Lazio struggling to marry their current existence, really, with what they were in the 1990s, which by Lazio standards was not typical. That was not kind of the role Lazio ought to have played, really, in Italian football. It has been a very stark contrast. I don't want to say come down, but it's been a stark contrast. And I think what they've built now is actually probably the most encouraging incarnation of Lazio post Cragnotti that we've seen. They have a distinct identity. They have several really good players. They are not going to win the Serie A title, but they are always competing, or mostly competing, for a place in the Champions League. And that, given where they've been, given how difficult it was to adapt to life after the boom finished, that's not too bad at all.
Lotito once tried to hire Marcelo Bielsa, or did rather, and that lasted, I think, a full 48 hours. Bielsa never left Argentina. When none of the 6 signings he demanded had arrived, he quit. having yet to step foot in the Stadio Olimpico, and instead Lazio promoted from within the under-19 coach, former player Simone Inzaghi, who's later poached by Inter, led them to the Champions League final last season. So Lazio went in another direction. A man who began coaching in the 8th tier, just in random villages, like one of which, Sting's got a villa there. The guy from the police and invented tantric sex. That's right, Lazio hired 5-pack-a-day smoker Maurizio Sarri, former Napoli and Chelsea boss, who has told the media he smokes 60 cigarettes a day. And when you do the math on that, I crap you not, it is quite remarkable how many cigarettes that is in his waking hours. But Sarri is one of football's purists, a true obsessive who can only countenance to see his teams play one elaborately intricate way. He complains football's becoming more and more disposable, that in the onslaught of games, when he wakes up in the morning, he can't remember who they're playing that day. He misses the pleasure of preparing all week for one single match. He admits his team isn't, quote, structurally built for this twice-a-week battering of a modern schedule. He said recently, we're not a great side, which is not exactly the kind of fiery Friday Night Lights team talk that sets you alight. But for a fan base that likes to sing My Way, the song popularised by Frank Sinatra at games, Sarri and his idiosyncrasies, they make an oddly good fit. Rory, under Sarri, more broadly under the owner Lotito, what's the identity of this new Lazio?
The one thing I should mention is the slightly weird political match of Sarri and Lazio. Does Lazio, as you say, do have a reputation for having a significant portion of their ultras are on the far right, and Sarri is a full-on leftist. Sarri is progressive values. He is, I think he's a former communist voter, if not a current communist voter. He has made no secret of that. That always felt like an uneasy match when he first joined. But as you say, I think Lazio, by accident maybe rather than by design, has actually proved quite a fertile home for him, because he does have to trade players. Obviously, they can't sort of build and keep a squad. Talented players tend to leave, but then one or two maybe find that Lazio is actually kind of the right level for them. And the best example of that is the playmaker, their best player, Luis Alberto, who has developed at Lazio into one of the outstanding players in Serie A. I think that isn't pushing it. And partly that's because of the way that Sarri's football allows him to express himself. He's got Ciro Immobile, of course, up front, the evergreen Italian great who's terrible when he's not playing in Italy. It's a mishmash of a squad. It's a bit of an uneasy relationship, I suppose, with the fans. Everyone feels as though they're kind of at Lazio, because that's the best they can do now. But it kind of works. And Sarri's been able to carve out, at times, the sort of football that he wants to see his teams playing. This season's been a bit disappointing domestically, but the fact they're in the last 16 of the Champions League, that may be their limit. But for Lazio, that's A, important financially, and B, not a bad achievement at all. And I think Sarri, a bit like Bielsa, to be honest, maybe recognises that there are years that are good and years that are bad, and you have to survive the bad years to get to the good years. And Lazio seem to have accepted that. It's not necessarily the most romantic relationship in all of Italian football or all of European football, but I think Sarri and Lazio work in a way that maybe they shouldn't, but it feels like the right sort of fit for both, because Sarri gives Lazio an identity, a style that is all their own. And as you say, that's important to the fan base. And Lazio gives Sarri a place where his vision is the most important thing. He's not being overtaken by demands for trophies or demands for finishing in this position in the league. His vision has the support of the club because it's so central to what the club has become.
In the league, let's just say a dip of form for Lazio. They finished second last season. Distant second to rampaging Napoli. But for all the fans who are expecting them to push on and improve, it's been somewhat of a letdown in league play. Currently 8th. Earlier this season, Sarri resorted to quoting a Florentine saying, "Se il pane e la sassata." Oh, I'll just translate that on the fly. There's bread, and then there's getting hit by a rock. I love that approach to life. Life's either glorious carbohydrates, or you're getting smacked in the down belows. There's nothing in the middle. And the highlights have been so rare this year that if there's one goal you remember by Lazio, it's probably scored by their goalkeeper. Rory, when you look at this season and this somewhat free fall of form in the league, was it a case of a squad not up to the rigours of double duty in the European campaign and league play every week? Or was it losing their best player ripped the heart out of the team? Was it simply shoestring budgets mean momentum cannot be sustained?
Little from column A, little from column B, quite a lot from column C, I think, to be honest. Yeah, Milinkovic-Savic was really important. He was one of those Milinkovic-Savic was one of those very Serie A things that he was linked with Manchester United basically every summer. I don't think they were ever interested in signing him. He worked in Italy because he was a specific type of midfielder, and Lazio was about the right stage for him. He was never worth as much to another club as he was to Lazio, which is why the
I
move
love
never
that.
happened.
I love that. That's just so romantic.
The
It's also economic.
Is it deeply economic, but also kind of romantic. But you can put a price on love, Rog. That's the thing.
Thank you.
Finally, someone says it. The I think that Sarri's methods inherently sometimes there's a bit of a choke point, and it sort of stops working. I think the fact that it's Lazio, and in terms of what they can pay players, the number of players they can sign for the types of fees means that it's going to be a little bit hit and miss, and the squad is relatively thin. That they can't run the sort of deep squad you need to be able to compete on two fronts across the course of a season. And then you would say, to be honest, finishing second last season was a slightly, don't want to say false position, but it was unexpected. Let's put it that way. They were a long way off Napoli. You had Juventus getting points deductions, Inter Milan being distracted by the Champions League and being very inconsistent, and Lazio kind of snuck through. They had some great performances last season. They beat Napoli convincingly, I think twice, which was harder last season than it is this season. But ultimately, I don't think this Lazio team are built to be a consistent contender. They're built to have booms and busts. There are years when they are golden and there are years when they struggle. There are months where they're golden and months where they struggle. I think that is the nature of where they are as a club, which makes them dangerous in the Champions League, because if Bayern encounter them in a good phase, then Lazio will pose them problems. If Bayern encounter them in the sort of form they've been in for most of this season, Bayern should be okay.
The last time Lazio were in the Champions League, 2021, they faced Bayern Munich in the round of 16, lost that one 6-2 on aggregate in the round of 16. This season they face, you've guessed it, Bayern Munich again, hoping for a very different scoreline, or else I'm just not sure I want to hear what Sarri says about the team. Oh, if things go bottom up. By the way, doing the math on Sarri's cigarette smoking, if he does smoke as much as he does, if he does smoke as much as he says he does, Rory, I mean, if the man sleeps like 8 hours a day, in that 16 hours, he's lighting up 100 cigarettes. I think he's spends his day lighting up a cigarette like every 8 or 9 minutes, which is somewhat remarkable.
I think, being British, Rog, and you'll know this, obviously, because you used to be British, Princess Margaret, the sister of the Queen, famously smoked 60 a day, I think. And I think that was the same figure that they worked out. And now Princess Margaret went out a lot. I don't know if Maurizio Sarri goes out quite as much as Princess Margaret did in her heyday, which you may have seen depicted on Netflix's The Crown. But I think the theory was that Princess Margaret had a different cigarette every eight, maybe 9 minutes. And then on rougher days, maybe one every 3 minutes, which is actually longer than it takes to smoke a cigarette.
Rory, you do, I've got to say, rival carbohydrates by delighting all 5 senses. You are just genuinely all the food groups in one human being. We've been doing this for years now, still in deep awe at your ability to recall every reserve player for young boys, put it in a continental context. Say you're a gentleman of fine taste, but then you choose to spend hours talking with me about football, so some of that's got to come into question. But we're incredibly grateful. Big love to you, my friend.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you very much for having me. I'm excited. This is exciting. The return of European football is exciting. This is a good time of year. It's the end of winter.
Yes, it says a man whose house is about to be blown down